I'm Ryan Stanton, and it's time for some ACEP Frontline. In today's episode, we have one that probably hits home for most of us, and that is a little bit of task interruption, something that is a standard part of the emergency medicine experience. And in fact, when we got to interview the executive producers and writers for The Pit, as well as Noah Wiley, I mentioned the idea that every scene should have 2 or 3 EKGs coming from all different angles, even in the heart of the most impactful moments of resuscitation. Just have an EKG slide right in front of somebody. And that'll make it more like real life. Well, this one is from the Maine chapter of ACEP, so Maine ACEP, the Emergency Medicine Leadership Summit. And we're talking task interruption in the ED environment is managing chaos, even possible. And this is by Dr. Andrew Perron from Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. And this is a great topic. It's a lengthy because of the length of the session itself, but there's also some crowd participation. So if you are at a place to where you can participate as well, feel free to do so. It takes place at about the 5-minute mark in the presentation itself, and so you'll need a pen and some paper and talking about the importance or the struggles associated with task interruption and what it means for us in terms of productivity. And so now, without any further ado, Dr. Andrew Perron with Task Interruption in the ED Environment is Managing Chaos, Even Possible, from the Maine chapter of the American College of Emergency Physicians Emergency Medicine Leadership Summit.
All right, so this is a thing that I love talking on this topic. It is something that I think affects all of us to a different degree. I always want to know, whenever somebody's speaking at a meeting, an emergency medicine meeting, I want to know, where do they practice to see if it's anything like where I practice. So I work in 2 places. I work at a critical access hospital, where it's me and a couple nurses during like 8 to 5. There's a hospitalist who will admit patients over on that side, but that's it. That's the physicians that you have. So I work about half my shifts there, and then the other half are at the big house, the Emerald Palace. That is, we got a right thumb fellow and a left kneecap fellow, and you got to make sure you call the right fellow for the right problem. Don't call the right kneecap person for a left kneecap problem. So I work in those 2 different environments. And I think this talk, while this happens a lot more at the big house, I still see it at the critical access hospital. And when things are kind of falling apart, I think about it a lot. So talking about task interruption, which is really kind of, in the DNA of emergency medicine, right? We all get it. But this is, I always think about, what if the surgeons had to deal with what we were dealing with on a daily basis? Because I may be, if I'm at the big house, we got a trauma come in and I'm trying to keep everybody on track and let nobody do anything stupid. And we're trying to intubate and whatever. And you think about how many things are going to try to get me off track. I'm going to be hearing about a sepsis alert patient. Why haven't I seen that patient yet? We got a code stroke coming. I need to get ready for that. Ortho's saying, can we have a 45-minute sedation to put a long leg cast on a kid? You got a med student who wants to tell, they think they heard an S4, but they're not positive. So can you come and listen with them to see if it's an S4, because they think it might be. You got smug consultants who want to tell you how to do your job. The board's falling apart. Has anybody ever have to sign EKGs? Anybody have that phenomenon? You got somebody pitching a fit about something. Your phone is ringing. You got traumas coming in, and also some bigwig is coming down to the ED, and then what at Maine Med we call trigger patients, we call them hammer patients, so you get hammered. And despite the fact that there's 2 attendings and you're both running a trauma, they will overhead, hammer in this room, hammer in this room, hammer in this room, understanding no one's going to go because we are managing the other stuff. So we are getting constantly bombarded with task interruption. So that was, that's what my DNA. I grew up taking care of stuff like that. So I thought about it a lot, and I wanted to put it into a conference talk. And I think this was a Grand Rounds first, maybe 5 years ago, and some stuff has changed. But what I wanted was a relevant topic. I wanted it presented with good evidence. A good Grand Rounds should really cover these 3 things, right? Relevant topic, good evidence, and offer a solution. And like the famous crooner Meatloaf once said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So it's going to be a relevant topic, and it's going to be presented with good evidence. We're going to work together on a solution. I'll tell you some that the literature is kind of points at, but it's, I think it's more in the design than in the once the horse is out of the barn. All right. Group exercise. I hate when I go to a talk and they do group exercises. So we're going to do a group exercise, but you get to do it by yourself. You don't have to pair up with anybody because I hate that even more. So the last page of your booklet is a blank piece of paper. Take out that blank piece of paper or find a blank piece of paper. Take it out. Put it in front of yourself with a pen. There should be pens in front of everybody. Draw a line like this, one line across the paper like that. All right, don't anybody do anything yet. Don't go yet. What you're gonna do, once I say go, is you're gonna, across the top of that line, write, "I am an awesome multitasker," exclamation mark. And underneath that line, you're gonna write the numbers 1 through 24. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And you're gonna raise your hand when you're done. Okay, everybody ready? Don't go yet. Ready, go. So, I got the most hands around 30 seconds. I saw my first hand, we had a high achiever at around 20 seconds. But mostly in that 20 to 30 second was when we all came in. All right, take your piece of paper, turn it over, draw the same horizontal line. Don't do anything yet. No, don't go, don't go, don't go. Same line on the paper, and I'm gonna have you write the same phrase in numbers, but you're gonna do this time, you're gonna write I and then 1, A, then 2, M, then 3, A, and then 4, that way. So you're not gonna do I am an awesome multitasker, you're gonna do I and then 1, A and then 2, etc. Raise your hand when you are done. Don't go yet, go.
I actually have to lengthen the music here because this part of the exercise took significantly longer than the first exercise. So if you're participating along and you aren't done yet, then, well, feel encouraged.
So, what happened? So the first one was about 15 seconds for our high performer. The very first person here came in at 32 seconds. So it took more than twice as long to do the same thing, multitasking style. And I bet the quality, if you look at the two, is gonna look different, right? And I bet the stress level was a little bit higher, right? You just multitask and you showed yourself that if I do one thing and do another thing, I can do it really, really well. But if I am constantly interrupted, I slow down, it's stressful, I don't do as well. That's what we do, right, in the ED. So here's some audience participation. This initial work, I think Kerry Chisholm, who I thought was an awesome guy, he was the first one, I think, that I can tell, really started looking at this and trying to figure out about workplace interruptions and what's going on. So in the normal 2-hour period, an academic EM physician will treat from how many to how many? Anybody have any guesses? How many patients? 1 to 100? 1 to 8? 4 to 8, okay. In a 2-hour period, how many individuals will an academic emergency physician interact with? Ballpark.
These are different individuals?
These are, yeah, how many unique individuals will they interact with? So in Carrie's academic ED, in a 2-hour period, the academic emergency physician treated somewhere between 4 and 16 patients in 2 hours, so that's 8 an hour. It doesn't mean you're seeing 8 an hour the whole time, but this was what they observed. And in a normal 2-hour period, the physician interacted with between 25 and 132 individuals with a median of 70. How much time in that 2 hours was spent on direct patient care, so really patient care focused, and how much time was physically spent touching patients in the 2 hours? Like where you're actually examining a patient and doing something. Any guesses? 5 and 0. That's the trauma surgeons. It's just like CT. So the time spent actually doing patient care would go from between 6 and 79 minutes, so the average was 36 minutes actually spent on patient care, and the time physically touching a patient was about 6 minutes out of the 2 hours. So task interruption, does it matter? Because if it doesn't matter, we don't need to talk about it anymore, right? When you get interrupted, this is from Carey's, we're gonna look at a couple different studies, but this is from Carey's study where they had paid observers watch you do your shift. When you got interrupted, what percentage of the time was the task that the physician was on never got back to? What percent did they never get back to the thing they were supposed to be doing? Any guesses? It was 20% in his study. So 1 in 5 times when they were interrupted, they never went back and did the thing that they thought was important enough to be on your to-do list, but they never went back. It got bumped out, and their mind had to handle this new thing. So there's a different study, but they came to about the same conclusion. So this is more recently, 2010. And it was impact of interruptions on clinical task completions. On the average in this study, physicians were interrupted 6 times an hour. 10% of everything they did was interrupted. They spent 15% of their time multitasking, and they failed to return to the task they were on about 20%. So I think that, that's 2 different studies that have said it's probably about a 1 in 5 chance when you interrupt a doctor, and we'll see nurses, other people too. When you interrupt somebody, there's about a 20% chance that the thing they thought was important enough to do at that moment is no longer going to be there. Here's just different ways to look at it. It's like, so what? That's part of the job. It's just I'm trying to quantify it in the beginning. So if you take that study, 11 interruptions per hour, in Emory, a poster from Emory that looked at this, they said each interruption was about a 45-second interruption. And then once you get interrupted, you got to get back to the task you were on, so you got to add another 4 seconds there. So the time spent per hour in interruptions is somewhere maybe around 10 minutes, and the time spent on an 8-hour shift is somewhere around 74 minutes just dealing with the interruptions. So you just got to remember that anytime you add a step in the ER, that's going to take the physician or the provider away from what they're trying to do, there's about a 1 in 5 chance you are going to have them not do something that they were intending to do, that 20%. So that's something, right? That's not nothing. So as you think about things that add value, add situational awareness, I told Mike I was going to do this. I thought of this at 2 in the morning last night, which is obviously too late to put in the talk, but this is an ASCOM, this is a picture of the ASCOM phone at Maine Med, and you get these alerts while you're trying to do, you're seeing patients, do whatever, you get these alerts. This one is a task interruption. It says priority 3, ETA 5, okay, 5 minutes, age 92, chief complaint, unknown, needs eval for something, and then some vital signs. And that's a task interruption. What you have to ask yourself, okay, is that worth losing 1 in 5 things to send that to the clinician that they're now going to lose something important because they stopped what they were doing to look at that and say, okay, I can't do anything with that task interruption, but I've now lost my opportunity. So not all task interruptions are the same, not all tasks are the same, right? So if you look at education-based studies that show when you interrupt a simple task, it's probably not as big a deal. But when a complex task is interrupted, it's a really big deal. And you never do as well on complex tasks that are interrupted as when they're not interrupted. An example of this is, and we'll talk a little bit about the flight industry or the pilot industry, but they have checklists, right? They go through checklists before they take off, when they're landing, all that stuff. If they get interrupted on their checklist, they have to start the checklist over. They don't just say, well, let's pick it up where we left off when something happened. They start the whole complex checklist over again because they know it's a complex task to take a plane off or to land a plane. And so they do not want that chance that the interruption took them off their game. So what do we do? And we're all familiar with this. We will try to compensate, right? We'll task shorten. We'll say, well, if I can get this central line in really, really quickly, there's less chance somebody's going to interrupt me while I do that. Or if I, listen to this presentation, I make them talk really, really fast, there's less chance that I'll get interrupted. So that's task shortening. That results in more errors. Interruptions add significantly to the cognitive load, right? Like you saw, just in writing the same word and the same numbers, it was harder. You were thinking more, which gives you more stress and more anxiety, and it can increase task errors. And again, so this is why other industries who do important things like we do, do everything they can to reduce the number of interruptions that they have at the time when they're doing complex tasks, not increase them. I always joke that, if I work the 6 a.m. shift, I'm going to take sign out on 40 patients, let's say. 30 are admitted, but I need to know something about them, and 10 are active workups. But it's 40 patients. Think about if a medicine service, they spend all day rounding, right? To take over a service of 40 patients, that's going to be a whole day process for them. We're going to do it, we better do it in less than 15 minutes. And at the same time as I'm taking sign out on those 40 patients, I will get a dozen EKGs to sign, some phone calls, maybe some radiology. We missed this reading overnight. Can you call the patient and tell them to come back? All those things are added on top of it. And then again, kind of some controlled experiments. With each interruption of the primary task, the thing that you're trying to do, you need more time once you get back to it. Your annoyance, if you measure people's annoyance, it goes up, the error rate increases, and the anxiety doubles. So again, all I'm trying to do is help quantify that task interruption is really, really bad. And who says we have to be good at this? Maybe we don't have to be good at this. Nope, ACGME says we do. This is a milestone for emergency medicine. If you're going to graduate a program, you should wind up somewhere around level 4 by the time you graduate. So you should be a pretty good task switcher by the time you graduate. So it's in the job, so we're going to be measured on it. So what things are negatively affected? So physician, patient-clinician contact time, patient satisfaction is decreased. We had one particularly aggressive EKG tech at Maine Med, who I don't think is there anymore. But I was having an end-of-life discussion with a patient's wife, and I was sitting across from her. And the EKG tech comes into the room, and then puts down an EKG on my lap and just stands there like that. And rightly so, this patient was totally pissed off that we were having this, I think we should extubate your husband and let nature take its course. They were extremely unhappy with that patient interaction. It increases your workload or your perceived workload. You have inaccurate documentation. We'll talk about ordering, particularly med ordering when you have task interruption. And in the end, you're going to have higher chance for error. Is this just a doctor thing? Nope. This is a study on nurses, the interruptions experienced by emergency nurses. They observed, again, an observational study, 38 shifts. There was about 85 interruptions per shift, or between 8 and 9 interruptions per hour of nurses. And it happened most commonly when they were visible. When are they visible? When they're either preparing medications or documenting. So they're sitting there trying to document medicines they gave, or they're preparing medicines to be given. That's when they're visible. Just like when I'm most visible is when I'm sitting still taking sign out from my partner. Everybody knows right where I am, so they can come and swoop on us. The priority of things that they were interrupted for, they tried to pre-identify, was it high, medium, or low? Most were medium, next most was low, and then very few were high priority. That's resulted in more errors in their medication administration, and then they scored their stress higher at the end of the shift. And then the bad news is we're undercounting, because what Carrie's study did and that next study did and what this study did, it only looked at external task interruption. And it's probably, for each external interruption you get, there's probably one internal interruption that you then nest on that external interruption, but you can't really count that. But it interrupts your workflow, and there's probably by doing that is probably still that same number applies, 1 in 5. It's going to be about 20% chance you're going to lose something important by that internal interruption. And so this is medicine only? No, this is a study of office people, and they said in an office setting, people spend an average about 11 minutes on a project before they get interrupted. And then it'll take them about 25 minutes after an interruption to get back to the point where they were at before there was a distraction. If you're in a cube, you're more likely than if you're in a private office to get interrupted. And then they quantified it by the duration of the interruption. So even if it's a 3-second interruption, it doubled their error rate, and the error rate tripled if it was like a 5-second interruption. And then you asked them to score at the end of the day with more interruptions. They were more, had more stress, and they scored it almost as high as the stress they get from work overload. So who else cares about this, right? We talk about this all the time. Pilots, astronauts, nuclear power plants, they all have things they do to be sure that when they're doing complicated tasks, they're left alone to do complicated tasks, which makes sense, right? So the sterile cockpit rule came on in 1981, and it's if they're below 10,000 feet, either going down or coming up, it's a sterile cockpit. You can only do things, they can only be interrupted basically for 4 things: fire, smoke in the cabin, an abnormal noise or vibration, or observance of fuel leakage so that one of the people looks at out the window. Other than that, you can't bother them. They have to land the plane or take the plane off. And this was based on the fact that when you look at black box recordings, they had found that lots and lots of non-important discussions were going on at the time they were trying to do these things. So they said, don't do that anymore. So does everyone agree it's a problem? Yes? Okay. So we got to figure out where we're going to go, because all these things aren't going to go away in the ED. There are going to be EKGs to sign. There are going to be phone calls. There are going to be traumas. There are going to be all those things. So what do we do? So I break it down into things that increase my situational awareness. And like I said, that task interruption, the person with the unknown complaint and needs unknown evaluation, that does not increase anybody's situational awareness. So my first thing I would look at in an ED would be get rid of stuff like that, because that's not helping anybody get ready for patient care. The other one that I remember, I don't know if it's still going on or when it stopped, but when we first opened the chest pain center, or the CDU, whatever, down at the end, we would get a call, inevitably on the evening or overnight, saying the third troponin was normal. And you'd say, okay, do I need to do anything? They'd say, no, they're up for a stress test in the morning. I'd say, okay, thank you. And there was no value added. They just wanted me to know the third troponin was normal. And I was like, why are we doing this? Why would we interrupt something important to tell me a normal value of a lab that's not going to change the patient's management in the ED? I don't know if we still do that. I never understood that one, but I asked him, at least when I was working, to please stop doing that. Because it did not add to my situational awareness. I wanted situational awareness. I need it for all the sick people. So situational awareness is really broken down into 3 things. There's the perception of the elements that are going on, the comprehension of their meaning, and then the projection of their status in the near future. So I have to perceive something, I have to understand it, and then I have to think ahead. And one of the things I think about, so like you get a call that somebody's coming in, imminent baby delivery. So perception, I'm now aware there's a baby coming, there's somebody coming, I'm probably gonna have to deliver a baby. So I'm thinking like that. Comprehension, I understand that. Yes, I've delivered babies, I know what I gotta do. And then projection is, we need to get the baby warming up, because it isn't warm right now. And so that's the 3rd step. And the problem is, that's the one we lose with workflow interruptions. We understand there's somebody coming to deliver a baby, we understand how to deliver a baby, but it's that 3rd piece that is most likely to go away when you get task saturated or task interrupted. It's that prediction of future events that are degraded the most in situational awareness by workflow interruptions. How many things can we carry in our head? Active things can most people carry in their head at one time? Like active items of like a to-do list. I got 6, I like it, pretty close. Somewhere between 2 and 7. Your short-term memory, your working memory, we can process about somewhere between, let's say 6 or 7 things. We're all smart, so we'll go to the high end. We can process 6 or 7 things at once. But when you bring in those other elements, now we got to kick something out because we cannot keep all that stuff in our short-term memory. And so you start letting stuff go. That's that 20%, right? That something came in, that took over. I was juggling these 6 things, and now this new piece of information's come in. It's important because I need to be situationally aware, but I'm going to have to let something go. So when we say we are multitasking, we really aren't unless we're walking and talking or doing something like that. We're really task switching because that's what we do with non-automatic actions. Multitasking is, again, doing something automatically without even thinking about it. And in the ED, most of the things are not automatic, I'm not thinking about. So we're really task switching. So then we got to decide the way we're going to attack this is we need situational awareness, but information overload is not the goal. So how do we walk that fine line? And here's where the evidence gets less and less and less, but we're all smart, so maybe we'll figure out something together. We'll do a little bit deeper dive. How do you even study this? It's hard, right? Because not all task interruptions, like we've learned before, are linear, and they're usually nested. There's interruptions on top of interruptions, and then maybe you throw in an internal interruption on top of the 2 external interruptions. And there's different kinds of interruptions, right? First of all, you got to know what was the task that was interrupted. If you're doing this and you're putting a tube in, that's probably not going to go away because that's a really, 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 really important task. You're probably not going to say, oh my gosh, I got to sign an EKG, let me put this down and do that, and then forget to go back to it. There's the task, that is interrupting. So what is the thing coming in? How do we define an error? What's the scope of the error? And then what's the time frame we're going to study? These are the things that you would want to know if you were going to actually study this. So 2018 study out of SAEM looked at 36 hours of emergency physician observation. They saw about 450 interruptions. The interrupted task was immediately suspended 76% of the time. So whatever the information that came in was, they said, well, that's now important than the thing that I'm doing. When they had that interruption, though, it was 33 or 36% of the time. They then had a self interruption that became nested on top of the interruption that was introduced. And in this study, I hope it's the 20%, because there's 2 studies that say 20%. This one said 60% of the time they never went back to the interrupted task, which is just crazy. So I'm going to throw out the 60% because that feels like too high, and I can't. I really hope we're not ignoring 60% of the things that we thought were important to do. So do some specifics on task interruptions. So ordering a medicine, this is depressing. So 36 EM physicians were observed for 120 hours while they were at computers ordering medicines. And there was about 8 interruptions an hour. Of the 239 medication orders they put in, 208 had prescribing errors. They were interrupted about 9 times an hour when they were prescribing, because that's, again, when you're visible, right? You sit down and you stop. You're not in a room, you're not walking, you're sitting there so somebody can come up to you. It's the same with the nurses in that other study. And the relative risk of screwing it up was about 3 if you were interrupted when you were prescribing a medicine versus if you weren't prescribing a medicine. This is an RN study. It was a direct observation. And when they were interrupted doing their medication stuff, it was about a 12% chance increased odds of both procedural and clinical medication administration errors when you interrupted them from doing their job. So again, it's not just providers, it's everybody. What's the baseline? That was the first thing I was like, well, maybe everybody really sucks at ordering medicines and it's not just emergency physicians, it's not just me as an emergency physician. So there are studies out there that inpatient, about 7% of medication orders are in error. In an ED at baseline, it's about 20% and about 12% in pediatric ED. And then you see the 3 references there. So it ain't good to start, but it gets way worse when you get interrupted when you're ordering a medicine. What I've done is my practice now is I really focus on that time and I try, if at all possible, to hold off on the interruption until I get the medicine ordered, or else I start over. I just delete it and deal with this thing and then start over. But I got a 1 in 5 chance that I'm going to screw that up. More data, an academic ED in 2017 2,400 interruptions across 210 clinical hours, 84 interruptions a shift, 11 interruptions an hour. How do they come? They're face-to-face about 25% of the time, with other physicians, face-to-face with nurses about 22% of the time, and then environmental about 20% of the time is how it breaks up. 53%, so half occurred when they were in patient rooms, and 78% of those that happened when they were in the patient room was a low priority interruption. So solutions, maybe, sort of. From that study, one thing you could say is, well, that maybe in-room, if we want to target a place to decrease interruptions, is in-room interruptions for low priority stuff, because in that study, that was a big chunk of them was, I'm in the room and you bring me a low priority thing to deal with. Maybe that's a solution, it's a start. So let's talk about solutions, but that's way too big. It's more like this, solutions, maybe little solutions. I don't think we have big solutions. So, again, if I'm an ED director, which I'm not, and I'm glad I'm not, but I would really think about any time I'm going to introduce something into the ED environment that's an interruption, I got to make sure that's going to improve situational awareness. And if it doesn't do that, it should be deprioritized. Like, just again, I go back to that text that comes in. There's zero value added from that for the clinician to get that on their phone. And then the next thing I would try to figure out is if there's a complex process going on, and I would say sign out is a complex process, you should really figure out ways to minimize those. Now, what we do at our sign out, what we try to do is we all go, we have the cave where we do our charting and whatever, and we close the doors so it's clear we're doing something. And the charge nurse is in there with us, and she tells everybody, we're going to be doing sign out, and we will be done in 15 minutes. Only come in if it's an emergency. We still get a lot of stuff that's probably not urgent, but that's one of the things we do to try to facilitate sign out on 40 patients between 2 people in 15 minutes. Other possible solutions, so optimize the ED to decrease non-essential task interruptions. Try to protect those high-risk distraction times. One of the things that we do try to do, especially in codes, we debrief after codes, but one of the areas I always want to talk about now that I've looked at more at this is we specifically identify what things were important during that code that we did need to know and what things did we not need to know. You don't want to call people out and say that didn't help, but you say this was really high priority. That was a useful thing that you task interrupted for. And you say, this was less helpful. I don't need to know that piece of information. It's one where you want to make sure you're not making people pissed off, but there are things during a code I need to know, and there are things I do not need to know. And like during intubation, if the SAT goes from 99 to 98, I don't care, but drawing everybody's attention to that can take away from the fact of what we really take away from the action that we're really working on. I keep hoping, I've asked our Epic team, and they can't figure out a way to do this. When you leave off a Word document, you close it, and you come back 3 weeks later, and you open up your computer, and you go to that Word document, you know what it says? You were right here. When you last used this document, you left off right here. Do you want to go back there? And I'm like, why can't the EMR do that, where I can say, well, I was doing something, I had to go away, now I'm back. I can't remember where I was or what I was doing. And so I've asked our Epic team, why can't we have it do that? If Word can do that, why can't Epic just say, last thing you did was you were putting in orders on this patient and then you walked away. Why doesn't it open me when I re-log in? Why doesn't it bring me there and say, you were last right here. Why don't you finish this thing? And then pausing. If you can have people hang on until you come to a natural break, that's always good too. I'm not going to read this. It's just included for completion or for completeness. It's just some different strategies that people have tried. Other strategies that come from outside medicine that people say are helpful for task interruption is prepare to resume. So when you're interrupted, before you go to the next task, if you can mentally just think about what you are currently doing, so that when you come back from the interruption, you have some imprinted memory of what the thing was you're doing. Because a lot of times I'm like, I just can't remember what I was doing before I got interrupted. I'll say, where was I walking when they asked me to go do that? I was walking to this room because they said there was a hammer, but then they had me walk to this room because there was a code. Mentally rehearse where you have to go, and that's called goal rehearsal. And there's outside medicine, some evidence that goal rehearsal helps. If you can delay the interruption, so you have a call, but you're just finishing signing out a patient, if they can hang on, just sign out the patient, then take the phone call. Create memory cues. This is, I write it on my hand. That's, if there's a thing I really, really, really do not want to forget, I'm one of those people who just writes it on my hand, and then I hope I don't gel before I get to that thing, because then it goes away. But I do write, I write things on my hand, I write things on stickers and stick them to my arm. I do anything I can to help me remember where I was going and what I was doing at that moment. And again, rehearse that next step. That's that goal rehearsal. Goal rehearsal, there is pretty good evidence that says it can help you if you do it right. So the time to resume can be decreased if you rehearse the goal of what you're going to do next. So there were some experiments, and they looked at interleave tasks, which is complex tasks that are more mentally challenging. And all of them basically said, yeah, if you do goal rehearsal, there's less decay. So one of the concrete things you can do is just when you stop, before you go do this thing, say, I was just about to do this thing, I was just about to do this thing, and then go do this. And there is some science that says you are more likely to go back and do that thing if you rehearse that. I had never heard of the Eisenhower matrix. Has everybody heard of it? Probably, I feel like I'm the last person in the world because it was presented as like really basic, and I was like, well, I never heard of that. But if I were an ED director, I would put everything that showed up in our to-do list, new thing that's shown up on our to-do list in an ED, I would put it through the Eisenhower matrix and say, what box does it fall into? Because that's going to help me decide what we're going to do with it. And if it's important and urgent, we're going to do it. We got to interrupt. That's important and it's urgent. If it's important but not urgent, we're going to figure out a way to get to it down the line, but we're not going to do it right now. And if it's not important but it's urgent, we figure out who we can delegate it to. And if it's neither important nor urgent, get rid of it. Get it out of the physician's life or the clinician's life because it's not contributing to anything. I think it's a cool, again, I never knew it existed. I think it's like one of those business school things that everybody knows about it. But if I were an ED director, I would be using this as new things came up and we were trying to decide how are we going to manage this, which boxes to go in would tell me what I was going to do with that. I try this. I try really hard to remember that the person interrupting the task, they're not doing it to annoy me, except for maybe that one who brought me the EKG when I was knee to knee with the person telling her husband was about to die. But they obviously, all the people working in the ED do not know everything I'm doing. I don't know everything they're doing. Sometimes they're interrupting because their job says they have to do it. Sometimes they're doing it because they're hoping I will help. Or they're in a spot where they cannot move forward without me giving them approval to move forward. So we're going to have some time for discussion a little bit, I think. But anytime you revise a process, this is where I think you can work on this because there's a lot of broken systems. We have a lot of broken workarounds for broken systems. But anytime you revise a process or a workflow or an algorithm for ED patient care, just ask yourself, have I minimized the possibility for low value task interruptions, those things that do not add to situational awareness, and get rid of them if you can. Some ones, again, that from my time at Maine Med, around 7:30, the new unit clerk would come in and start just calling around, hey, who has this phone? It's like, there's no value added to that. Next time you see me, just say, what phone are you on? But the calling of who has this phone, or again, that third troponin was negative, and there was never any value added to that. When you get interrupted, just decide, and I always say this like in our ED, it's the hammer patients. They don't know, at that moment, their perception is, well, this patient really needs attention right now. They don't know all the other things I'm doing. They can't, and I don't know what else they're doing. But understand, you may be even though I got a hammer, that means I'm supposed to give up what I'm doing and go do that thing. I may not be able to do that. I can't interrupt this task right now. And you just have to make sure, I always tell them, I couldn't come, this was going on, I'm here now, what can we do? If your answer is, well, as a director, no, we got this new thing and it's just gonna have to go through the attending and the ED, just know you're adding it with a 1 in 5 chance that you're gonna knock out something important and then figure out a strategy. So interruptions can take time to recover from and lead to errors. Shorter interruptions are better than longer ones. Interruptions delivered during a natural break are better than not natural break. Interruptions that are relevant to the current task are less disruptive. Our working memory storage is probably somewhere in the 2 to 7 range. You self-interrupt probably as much as you get external interruptions. Interruptions cause stress. And you can only multitask automatic actions. Everyone else is task switching, which is really hard. So we do have some time, and I put this slide on purpose because I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on ways they've addressed this, helped this. And again, I understand it's different. When I'm at the critical access hospital, it's different task interruption than I am at the big house, but there's still task interruption. It's not all one and not the other. So I'd be interested in how other people have approached this or have thoughts of what has worked for them.
Dr. Andrew Perron with Task Interruption in the ED Environment is managing chaos even possible from the Maine chapter of the American College of Emergency Physicians Emergency Medicine Leadership Summit. How did you do? Did you do all right with your task switching and understanding a little bit more in terms of how these interruptions can negatively impact our workflow efficiency and honestly outcomes? This is one of the areas we need to significantly push for as emergency medicine in terms of protecting that area and our ability to stay focused on the care and patients that we have. And honestly, I think it's getting worse than better. It reminds me of a situation where I actually had a patient that we were doing a cardioversion on, sedation for atrial fibrillation. The first cardioversion was unsuccessful. And of course, just like I mentioned in the beginning of the program here, somebody brought me an EKG right before I did the next cardioversion. It was a STEMI, so it was important that that information was given to a physician, but then immediately turned around with the patient sedated and did the cardioversion, and unfortunately did not realize that we did not have the synchronization on, and then as soon as I hit the button, it cardioverted. I knew that there was not that usual pause and got that sinking pit and feeling in my stomach. Thankfully, the cardioversion was successful, normal sinus rhythm, so everything worked out just fine. But just an example of what happens when our energies, our focus is diverted or we are interrupted, and the potential complications that can take place because of that. Well, I invite all of you to subscribe to the podcast, make sure that you have your favorite episodes tagged, and listen to and share them, and subscribe to the program on whatever your favorite player is so that we get those numbers up. Please give us some feedback, 5-star rating if you will, to help push us up in the algorithms. And until next time, I'm Dr. Ryan Stanton, and this has been some ACEP Frontline.
If you're not on the front lines, you're on the sidelines.
Cue the music.
Bow, bow, bow.
Dinger. Quiet place, all
Yeah.
alone. Da, da, da.